Hundreds of workers have been forced to take cover after a tunnel in a nuclear finishing plant collapsed in Washington state. Following the incident Tuesday morning, which a spokesperson told The Independent is still being investigated, a manager sent a message to workers telling them to secure ventilation in your building and to refrain from eating or drinking. The U.S. Department of Energy activated its Emergency Operations Center Tuesday following the collapse. Some workers were reportedly told to evacuate while others were told to shelter in place as officials investigated the severity of the situation. The Department of Energy informed us this morning that a tunnel was breached that was used to bury radioactive waste from the production of plutonium at the Hanford Nuclear Reservation, Governor Jay Inslee said in a statement. He said that the White House had reached out to his office as well. This is a serious situation, and ensuring the safety of the workers and the community is the top priority, Mr. Inslee said. Our understanding is that the site went into immediate lockdown, in which workers were told to seek shelter, and all access to the area has been closed. A spokesperson for the Hanford site said during a live broadcast that the tunnel collapse was discovered by workers on patrol in the area. Crews noticed that a portion of that tunnel had fallen, Destry Henderson, the spokesperson, said, emphasizing that researchers had not found spilled or leaked radioactive materials. The roof had caved in about a 20-foot section of that tunnel. The tunnel reportedly contained highly contaminated materials including nuclear waste trains that are used to transport radioactive fuel rods. A spokesperson said that there was no evidence to suggest that radioactive materials had been released and that all of the workers in the area were accounted for. An official tally of those with orders to shelter in place was not immediately available, a spokesperson said, but there were no reported injuries. The U.S. Department of Energy, DOE, Richland Operations Office activated the Hanford Emergency Operations Center at 8:26 a.m., the Department of Energy said in an earlier statement. There are concerns about subsidence in the soil covering railroad tunnels near a former chemical processing facility. The tunnels contain contaminated materials. The nuclear site, located in the city of Hanford, is a former plutonium production site that was used to help develop the American nuclear arsenal 70 years ago. More recently, however, a private contractor hired by the Department of Energy is working on a $110 billion project to clean up 56 million gallons of chemical and nuclear waste stored in as many as 177 underground tanks. Before the Tuesday collapse, those tanks were reportedly leaking toxic and radioactive vapors and chemicals that have been linked to cancer, brain damage, and lung damage. There were at least 61 workers exposed to those deadly vapors last year. Experts have called the location the most toxic place in America and an underground Chernobyl waiting to happen. Cleaning up the Hanford nuclear site has been a priority for the Energy Department for years. The site hasn't produced plutonium since 1980 and a cleanup program was started there in 1989. The area has since been the subject of controversy and has been the target of a lawsuit filed by Washington Attorney General Bob Ferguson last year, who contended that the Energy Department and contractor Washington River Protection Solutions had allowed the release of vapors from underground nuclear waste tanks that pose a serious health risk to workers. Hanford is a small agricultural community in south-central Washington about 200 miles from Seattle. Hundreds of workers were told to take cover at the Hanford Nuclear Reservation after a tunnel full of highly contaminated materials collapsed Tuesday. But officials say no radiation was released, and no workers were hurt. Officials say a collapsed patch of ground above the tunnel was larger than first believed. The U.S. Department of Energy said the collapse covered about 400 square feet, 37.1 square meters, instead of the 16 square feet, 1.4 square meters, first reported. Hundreds of workers were told to go into a take-cover position after the tunnel in a plutonium-uranium extraction, PUREX, plant collapsed. The agency says the rail tunnels are made of wood and concrete and are hundreds of feet long, with about 8 feet, 2.4 meters, of soil covering them. The U.S. Department of Energy says the incident caused the soil above the tunnel to sink between 2 and 4 feet, half to 1.2 meters. They were originally constructed to hold rail cars that were loaded with contaminated equipment. 8 rail cars are in the tunnel that collapsed, but it feeds into a longer tunnel that contains 28 loaded rail cars. The tunnel collapsed near where the 2 tunnels join. The tunnels were sealed in the mid-1990s, and are checked periodically. During routine surveillance, the agency said it discovered a 20-foot wide hole in the roof of one of the tunnels. I would underscore this is confined to a small area of the Hanford site, Destry Henderson, deputy news manager for the Hanford Joint Information Center, told NBC News. The facility does have radiological contamination right now, but there is no indication of a radiological release, Henderson said. A manager sent a message to all personnel telling them to secure ventilation in your building and refrain from eating or drinking. A source said take cover status was expanded to the entire site at 10:35 a.m. The source also said that crews doing road work nearby may have created enough vibration to cause the collapse and that VIT plant employees were in cover mode as well. Responding agencies include the U.S. Department of Energy, Richland, West Richland, and Kennewick City Fire and Police, Benton, Franklin, and Grant County Fire and Police officials, Washington State Patrol, and Oregon and Washington State officials. The Statesman Journal reports the Oregon Department of Energy has activated its Emergency Operations Center in response to the Hanford emergency, which is 35 miles away from Oregon. Washington Governor Jay Inslee said the Department of Energy and the White House reached out to his office after the incident. I think anytime there's a failure of your expected containment, it's a concern, said Inslee. He said the state is monitoring the air quality independently from federal authorities. Hundreds of workers at the Department of Energy's Hanford nuclear site in Washington state had to take cover Tuesday morning after the collapse of 20-foot-long portion of a tunnel used to store contaminated radioactive materials. The Energy Department said it activated its emergency operations protocol after reports of a cave-in at the 200 East area in Hanford, a sprawling complex about 200 miles from Seattle where the government has been working to clean up radioactive materials left over from the country's nuclear weapons program. The agency said in a statement that the 20-foot section is part of a tunnel that is hundreds of feet long and is used to store contaminated materials. The tunnel is one of 2 that run into the plutonium-uranium extraction facility, also known as PUREX. The section that collapsed was in an area where the 2 tunnels join together, the department said. The PUREX facility, once used to extract plutonium from spent nuclear fuel, has been idle for years but remains highly contaminated, the agency said. Energy Department officials said there was no indication of a release of contamination at this point but that crews were still testing the area. Responders also were using a robot to take video and survey the damage. The department said that Energy Secretary Rick Perry had been briefed, adding that everyone has been accounted for and there is no initial indication of any worker exposure or an airborne radiological release. But Edwin Lyman, a senior scientist at the Union of Concerned Scientists, said there is still cause for concern. It appears that this is a potentially serious event, he said. Collapse of the earth covering the tunnels could lead to a considerable radiological release. An August 2015 report by Vanderbilt University's Civil and Environmental Engineering Department said the PUREX facility and the 2 tunnels had the potential for significant on-site consequences and that various pieces of dangerous debris and equipment containing or contaminated with dangerous, mixed waste had been placed inside the tunnels. Cleaning up radioactive materials at the Hanford site, which is a federal facility, has been one of the Energy Department's priorities for years. Reactors at Hanford produced plutonium for the U.S. nuclear weapons program. Plutonium production there ended in 1980, and the cleanup program began in 1989. Former Energy Department official Robert Alvarez said that remotely controlled rail cars once carried spent fuel from a reactor to the Purex chemical processing facility, which then extracted dangerous plutonium. He said the plant lies near the middle of the sprawling 580-square-mile Hanford site and was a very high-hazard operation. Many contaminated pieces of equipment, including the rail cars, have simply been left in the tunnels, he said. The Vanderbilt report said that there were 8 rail cars in the older tunnel and 28 in the newer one. The cave-in was discovered during routine surveillance, according to the Energy Department. Photographs showed a gaping hole, plainly evident because the tunnels are largely above ground. Workers near the Purex facility were told to shelter in place, and access to the area was restricted, according to the Energy Department statement. Officials requested that the Federal Aviation Administration put a temporary flight restriction in place, according to the FAA. The 2 tunnels are covered with about 8 feet of soil, according to the Energy Department, which added that the depth of the subsidence of soil appears to be into the tunnel. Alvarez, the former Energy Department official, cited a 1997 report that said the older tunnel was about 360 feet long, 22 feet high and 19 feet wide. Constructed decades ago, the walls of the older tunnel are 14 inches thick and held up by pressure-treated Douglas fir timbers, the report said. They rest on reinforced concrete footings. The newer tunnel was built with reinforced concrete. In an email, Alvarez added that the tunnels now store contaminated train cars and a considerable amount of highly radioactive, ignitable wastes including possible organic vapors. And while the older tunnel is reinforced with timber, Alvarez said, according to a 1997 DOE report, inspection of the tunnels is not feasible because of radiation levels in excess of 5 roentgens per hour. A Röntgen, or RAD, is a measure of radioactive exposure. 5 roentgens is the annual limit for a U.S. nuclear worker. Fixing the damaged tunnel could prove difficult. The Energy Department said on its website that officials are looking at options that would provide a barrier between the contaminated equipment in the tunnel and the outside air that would not cause the hole in the tunnel's roof to widen further. Although the Trump administration has vowed to slash the budgets of most Energy Department programs, the administration does not plan to skimp on the one charged with the Hanford cleanup and with other nuclear sites. It has requested $6.5 billion for the agency's environmental management program for 2018. The budget for Hanford alone is about $2.3 billion in the current fiscal year, about $1.5 billion of that going to the management and treatment of approximately 56 million gallons of radioactive liquid waste stored in underground storage tanks. Trump has been slow to fill science-related positions, and he has not yet named a new Assistant Secretary for Environmental Management. A career department employee is serving in an acting capacity. During his recent confirmation hearing, Berry was asked by Washington Senator Maria Cantwell, D., about the Hanford site. So are you committed to funding Hanford cleanup and what it takes and getting the waste treatment plant finished? Cantwell asked. Senator, I'm committed to working with you and prioritizing what is one of the most dangerous, most polluted sites that we have in this country, Perry replied. He vowed to visit Hanford and said he looked forward to walking that site with you. On Tuesday, Cantwell issued a statement praising first responders and saying that she was monitoring reports. She said that worker safety must be our #1 priority, and we need to understand whether there has been any environmental contamination resulting from the subsidence at these tunnels. Governor Jay Inslee, D., said in a statement he was aware that a tunnel was breached that was used to bury radioactive waste from the production of plutonium at the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. This is a serious situation, and ensuring the safety of the workers and the community is the top priority, Inslee said.